process.
Sorry, mate.
Yeah, sorry, I was saying my work is in project management in robotics, so I've seen a lot of the world. Been fortunate enough to see a lot of aviaries around the world. My interest in the hobby began in the 80s as a kid. I was born in Victoria, and I was fortunate enough to catch a green budgie in my uncle's market garden. So aptly at the time named it after my best mate, Stefan. Took it to a pet shop. Stefan turned out to be Stephanie. So it was a girl. So we held her. She sat above the freezer for the longest time and eventually passed away. So when she did, went to the pet shop, got another one. This time it was a boy, a green one. This time we called it Stefan, and it stayed Stefan. So we were very happy. And this one particular day, my uncle caught another budgie in his market garden, and he brought it over. And my father said to me, "That's not a budgie, that's a canary, but it's a giant canary." I said, "No, it can't be a giant canary." So we took it down to the pet shop, and the guy said to us, "That's an albino." So this albino budgie turned out to be a hen. So we thought, "Oh, that's great," and we put him in a cage together. So Stefan and Stephanie, they got along famously. Well, the female, we didn't actually name her, I apologise, but Stefan and the albino got along famously. And we decided we'll try and get these things to breed. So we put a nest box on the side of the cage, and they were kissing and doing all these things all the time, and thought, this is kind of odd. They're not interested in a nest box. And obviously back in the day, we didn't have any access to things like the internet. So down to the local library I went as a 10, 12-year-old kid, found some books and got involved in that, started reading it and found out that budgies are gregarious. So we decided we need to get a couple other pairs of budgies. So went to the pet shop again around the corner and bought 2 more pairs of budgies, and Dad cobbled me up a little aviary and we put it together, and sure enough, Stefan and the albino hen went straight down and started breeding, and we thought, this is great, love this. Dad come and got me from school one day, and he said, it was the middle of lunch, and he said, "You need to come home." I'm like, "What's happened?" He's like, "You need to come home." I thought, "Oh, no, something terrible's happened in the family." And I get home and the albino hen has beheaded the babies. So obviously that's why somebody had thrown her out and let her fly. So not to be deterred, decided to go on and try and breed some more with the other pairs and try and do something. So that level of interest in it, when you're a young kid and you're at high school, talk about it with a few of your mates, and it turned out that the guy across the road, Brad Wind, had budgies, and his father actually had them, and he had some birds from this guy who was a champion breeder in the area, Bruce Carter, and these things were sky blue grey wings, and they were phenomenal. These huge birds. Now, this is back before we started importing budgies. So beautiful contrast, body to wing, beautiful grey colour. So we decided to start breeding budgies. So he was going to breed them and I was going to breed them. And of course, a couple of mates at school, Wayne Douthert, his old man was a parrot breeder and had these Eastern Rosellas. So Wayne decided, I'll get a couple of nest boxes too. And soon enough, one of the other guys, Hannah Hammond, he got involved in it. Hayden Ryan, Kane Smolinars. We had this little group of people who were all under 18 who were really keen on budgies. And we decided to go and find a budgie club. And there wasn't one in town where I grew up, but there was a cage bird society. So we went there and we joined that, had a great time. Eventually, by the time we left, I think they had about 40 members. So it had gone from about 5 to 40, and we grew it enormously. But where the real fun was for us was, on a Friday night, Hannah Hammond, his father owned Sale Pizzeria. And so on Friday night, I'd be swapping a sky blue cock for a Mexican pizza. And we could, go through and enjoy each other's company, swap birds, have a great time. So when we went to the Budgie Club, Ernie and Faye Boyce were there, and they were intermediate breeders. And they said, look, this is a cage bird club, but there is a dedicated Budgie Club in Morwell, which later became the Gippsland Club. So they took us up there, and there were some great people there, some big name budgie breeders. So I met a guy there back in the early, well, it'd be 1990/1991, called Alan Rowe, who obviously is still around now. And Barry Herbert was my mentor. at that point. So we'd go into the show or go into the meetings, and Barry would make a beeline for us and say, okay, here's all the birds before the judges judge them. I want you to tell me which is the best one, but more importantly, I want you to tell me why. And every meeting we had to go in there and talk about these birds, and he'd tell us what we did right and he'd tell us what we did wrong. Anyway, time went on, started, built a shed. I remember Vinegar fronting the cages, in the early 90s when Guns N' Roses album came out, Use Your Illusion, out there with my father. Had some great times putting all of that together. And we sent a couple of birds off to Morwell to one of the shows, and I ended up getting Best Beginner Hen, adult hen. Now, I was with a bought bird. As a beginner, you're allowed to show bought birds over there. And I remember exactly where I was standing in Dad's shed, on the old phone that had the big cord hanging out, and I just remember fist pumping the air when I won this award. And when I got back into budgies in 2005, Barry said to me, I never had the heart to tell you you had all three birds in that hens class. There was no one else in there. So I'd beaten myself. But it got me hooked on budgies. So we used to travel back and forth to Morwell to the meetings all the time. Every opportunity I could, I'd jump on board and go to a diploma show down in Melbourne, try and get involved there as a steward. Used to love taking photographs of the birds as well. So got invited to a few people's houses to do that. We went up to Queensland for a holiday, and I found a Henry George bird in a pet shop. Somebody had sold out and sold it there, and managed through networking to get it on a truck down to Sydney. And then one of the other guys who was in the Budgie Club in Sale was a truck driver who drove from Sale to Sydney, and he picked it up at a depot. So when I got home, this sky blue hen was waiting for me, Henry George rung. So it was exciting times and lots of fun. When I went to university at the end of 1994, going into 95, I had to sell out all my birds. So I had a 10-year hiatus of traveling the world and working. And in 2005, obviously got back into breeding exhibition budgies, so over here in South Australia. So joined the Northeast Budgerigar Club at the time and had a great run of success getting birds in the state team. Started off, I thought, knowing what I knew about budgies, the right way to go about it. So going and finding an open breeder, going and finding, looking at the stud, looking at the birds related to the birds, did all of that, made a good investment in the budgies, and I can openly admit I got it wrong. So although I had all the best intentions of doing the right things, it just didn't work. So, managed to, obviously, as I came back into it, it was right near when the Logan Shield was, which is our state selection show. The Nationals was on the following week, and I looked at the photos of the birds, and there was two birds in particular that I love from there. There was a bird of Gary Gazzard's, who went on to become a lifelong friend of mine, and a bird that finished second in the pied class of Wally Kappa's. So he was a grey-green dominant pied, 04, 055. So really, really strong bird. And I reached out to those guys as a beginner, and Gary said to me, look, I'll be honest, there's about a 3-year wait trying to get a budgie off me directly. You can buy a couple through the auctions. He said, based on the birds that you like, I'd tell you this particular grey-green cock here. He said, but I'd also tell you I wouldn't spend more than $500 on him. And he said, these are some people that I could recommend to you who have my birds, who may have some surplus. So he suggested Wally Kappa, Ellen and Chris Drury, and Ian Hannington. And so I reached out to those guys, and I was fortunate enough with Wally Kappa. Wally said to me, what do you like about the pied cock? And I said, I love his brow, the feather coming out from here and the formation of the cap. And Wally said he gets that from his father, and his father is GGO1129. And he said, I tell you what, it's 2005 now, he's a 4-year-old budgie. He said, I'll give him to you. Just off the back of that, that's the kindness that's in this hobby sometimes for beginners when you're starting out. I went on, I think I bred 44 birds off him. So I think Wally got rid of him a bit early. He bred very well for me, and ironically, he was very closely related to the birds that I wanted from Gary. So the bird that I really liked to Gary's was off his pair 31, this particular bird had the same father as the pair 31 birds. So really set me off. Hannah was great to me as well, gave me some really good birds, gave me access to them. And Gary has been a mentor for me for the longest time. So, but yes, went through, and probably it was about 2011. I'd obviously had my first bird room in Sale, and then I built a bird room in Athelston, where I was married, and the kids obviously had gotten involved in the budgies. And we moved houses to Norwood, and I built a bigger aviary, which I can probably, if I can share my screen here, let me go back, give you a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about. So this is my first aviary here, if you can see this. So this is the one from Sale as a kid. So it's a tin shed. You're looking at, my breeding cages were all wooden. I had a dual outside flight, and then a tiny little aviary next door to it where I had a couple of kakarikis. Had a German Shepherd guard dog there, as you can see in the background. And there's my little award from the Budgie News from 1991, where I won my best beginner adult hen. My aviary in Athelston, I don't have photos of to include today, but this will give you an idea of my bird room in Norwood. So I had breeding cages along one side. I had an inside flight on the end of it, which had an open door all the time that went out into a 9-metre long flight that you can see on the far, I'm assuming it's your right-hand side as well there, which is an outside flight. So I had a dishwasher, a lot of things in there, a lot of birds, so they're all mixed up. So any cull birds, any variety birds, everything were all in together into one big aviary. What I try to do is go through every time and understand lessons learned a little bit better. So every iteration of the bird room improved on something in my mind. So when I looked at this bird room, one of my things was obviously airflow was for me a bit of an issue, making sure, this was the last time that I went with wooden cabinets. Keeping it clean and being smart about that. I found that I was spending an hour and a day washing out drinkers and doing those kind of things. So I went and bought a dishwasher and put it in there, because the hour's better spent with the birds and, looking at hens or understanding things a little bit better. In 2011, I got divorced and didn't really want to show the birds too much. Certainly enjoyed breeding them. But what it meant was during the time we obviously had to sell Norwood, and I had to put the birds out to the warehouse. And I had to downsize significantly. It was also a time factor issue. And I think it's been one of the keys of my success was actually the fact that I had to really cull them super hard and reduce everything to take them out there, because I just couldn't fit the numbers out there. So I went down to 18 breeding cabinets. So what you can see here in the picture for Norwood, you'll see there's 4 across and 3 down is 12. There was actually another 12, a bank of 12 against that as well. So there was 24 in total. So out at the warehouse, the birds were kept in a Bondor style cool room inside of the warehouse. So they didn't have access to outside. So what I did is install UV lights, again, a dishwasher, just to try and make things really simple for me. But I also put in 4 small flights rather than 1 big flight. From there, eventually, when I bought, I built up at Taringi, which is my current bird room. So if we're talking bird rooms, I had Sale was iteration 1, Athelston iteration 2, Norwood iteration 3, the warehouse iteration 4, and this here is iteration 5 of my bird room. So every time, as I said, you want to try and learn something and make something a little bit better. So the idea behind this one is that it's a shed inside of a shed. So the shed is fully insulated. And then inside I have a cool room material. What I found is that with cement, the birds, their feet can get cold if they're standing down on the floor. When a bird gets sick, it tends to go down to the floor or it fluffs up. When it does, it's, on a cement floor, its feet get cold, which only exacerbates the problem. So the first thing I wanted to do was try and maintain a bit of temperature control in the room. So you can see on the far right-hand side, I installed this product called Thermosheet, which is insulation for the floor, and it is absolutely fantastic. So I insulated the shed, which is probably a bit of, people would consider overkill, but if you insulate the shed and then you insulate the room, your ability to hold the temperature constant is very, very good. So what I come to now, this is sort of what my bird room looks like. So along the left-hand side, you've got all the breeding cabinets, and then across the middle of it, you've actually got your aviary. So this is what an aviary would typically look like. They're all on wheels. They're designed around simplicity. So when I designed this, they're designed a certain height off the ground. Now, I could have put storage underneath them. I didn't. If I put storage underneath them, it'd allow me to put my show cages and things like that there. But what I love is the ability to wheel these things outside and just high pressure clean them, and didn't want any issues with the water ingress. So the way that I designed this is, if you can see where the latch is on the doors there, I went and stood up against the cage and sort of hit that around groin height, and then reached out this way and reached out this way as far as I could, leaning into the cage, and they became the two extents of how far back the aviary could go, which just happened to be two of those you can see down on the floor. They're 600 by 300 breeding cage trays. So the aviaries themselves are 3 trays long and 2 trays wide. Makes it really simple because underneath is this same grid mesh. So for me to clean them, it's really, really simple. So I can just take these trays out and replace them in a couple of minutes. And the purchase, I've since improved since this video here. I got some little steel V's from Avian Vitality, and they just sit into those grooves. And then what I do is I just take them out of the groove, wipe them over, and put them back. So I can do that once a week. So the birds aren't getting access to, the birds aren't having poo, feces all over the perches at any time. So hopefully this video plays okay for you. I know through Zoom sometimes it's a bit of a challenge, but it gives you an idea of what the seed looks like, how I have things structured. So I use Critter Comfort on the floor. I use a coarse grade Critter Comfort for the aviaries, and I use a fine grade Critter Comfort for the nest boxes. In my room, I use AviSmart, which is a Breed Pro Plus product. I use Greens and Grains, which you can get from Allenby. I use a regular seed mix from Maxi Seeds. And I use a herb and veg mix from Avian Vitality, which you can see there. So just a couple of different mixes that the birds love to get into. In terms of the room now that it's all closed up, I have this extraction system based on it. So one of the things for me, I see a lot of people get out of the hobby because of problems with dust. And for me, if I'm spending a bit of time in there, it's a problem. So what I wanted to do is try and use best practice. So I got some, some details from Daniel Lutoff on what he does. So you take air from one end of the room and you take it out the other. Now you go from the narrowest end, the length of the room. And the idea is that to keep dust out of suspension, let me take a quick drink, sorry. You want to be traveling at about 0.5 meters per second. When you do, the air comes in and you see the middle slide here, which is the bags. You'll see all the build-up on there that occurs throughout the week. And on the very far right-hand side, you can see this is what it looked like when it was clean. So my bag filters down the bottom, and then my egg crate filters, and then what sits in over and above this is a HEPA filter. So my air, I've got a little air quality sensor in there. I can measure my temperature in the bird room. I can measure humidity in the bird room, and I generally hold it within about 4 degrees. So between 20 and 24 at any point in time. Now, what you can see here, this is the egg crate filters. So even after the bag filters, you can see that there's a little bit of dust coming out of the back of those. These here so this is obviously potentially what could be going wrong with your birds or going into your lungs. And I find that the more dander you have around, so the more of this white powder, the more likely you are to have French malt. So I see a correlation strongly between the two. So for me, it's very important about keeping that white dust out, which is one of the reasons, if you look at the cages now, I've actually got them set off the wall and they're wire cages. So air can flow through the bird room from one end to the other very freely. And also, obviously, all the cages are wire so that, again, air is travelling through the room very freely. The only downside is obviously the cost of the electricity bill. So that's a bit of a problem. Brett, did you want me to show a couple of pictures of the birds now at the same time?
Yes, please.
Sure. So, don't know why it's showing me that. Okay. So, this is a Spangled Grey-Green cockbird that is a 2021 bird. One of the birds that I bred down from where I am. So I'm focusing very heavily on this, the cap formation, and I guess the corresponding mask, but at the same time the size. So I like this guy. This here's a pair that I had up in a breeding cage. The hen looks a bit terrible around the cere in terms of a little bit of discharge there, but trying to sort of reinforce that particular face on the budgies. This is one of the cockbirds that I used reasonably heavily back in sort of 21, 22. This is a young cockbird that didn't get a chance to go to the Nationals this year. He went into a molt just before, about 6 weeks before the Nationals, and didn't come out of it in time. So he's a very strong budgie. Pair grey-green normal and grey-green cinnamon that I have up now. This particular cockbird I've got a lot of time for. So a couple of babies. So when you're looking at the feather formation around the cere, I was fortunate enough with my travels and with work to spend some time in the US and near a guy called Jeff Hall. So if anyone's ever heard of the Triple J, they're, I guess, like Holmes family, their name is Triple J in America. So it's John, Jeff, and John Jr. And the three of them have a partnership. So two of them are in Boston and the other one is in Ohio, which in terms of schematics is probably 2,000 kilometers away from one another. But Jeff has imported a lot of birds from Daniel Lutoff and other guys. I spent a bit of time with Jeff. He wasn't far from where I was working, so maybe 3 hours in Detroit. So I went down there on a weekend and had a look at the birds. And, you can go into an aviary and you can take a look around at the birds and you can see certain things and you can pick things up. But I was fortunate enough with Jeff that I went back there enough times that I saw him import the birds from Brian Sweeting and a couple of other guys. But what was really interesting is I was there and he was pairing up. So we went through and we talked about what he was doing in terms of pairing up. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. Here's my 2 cents worth on it. And he put the birds down to breed and he was going on holidays at the time. And he said to me, look, you're working an hour away at the moment. I was working at Chrysler North Assembly Plant, where they make the Jeep in Toledo. And there's literally a highway out the front, the 80-90, that runs from there straight through to New York. And Jeff lives straight off that road. So it was literally, I think it was 56 or 59 minutes at the speed limit on the freeway. And, literally 2 turns to get to Jeff's house. And he said to me, I've got a guy locally who's going to come and feed the birds and water them. He said, but he doesn't know what to look for when a bird, is egg bound, or he doesn't know what to look for if, a mum's not feeding a chick properly. And I just wonder, given I'm gone for 2 weeks, would you mind just, coming down maybe once or, best twice to have a look at the birds? Now, these are the birds that we paired up and they were hatching eggs at this time. So I took the opportunity. I went there every single night after work. So I was literally straight out on the freeway, straight there, and I'd spend 2 hours there. I'd look at the birds, I'd play around with them. I'm looking at the formation, and one of the things I noticed is that this sear feather that comes out here, the birds that he imported from Daniel, it started down here and went out. So it's almost like they'd taken the face and just moved it down a little bit. And I thought that was a really important observation for how we look at these particular things, because you listen to Daniel and you listen to Martin talk, and they talk about this one rounded face, whereas in Australia for the longest time we sort of had this bit come out from the sear, and then we've had this bit come out from the sear, and it's sort of come out and up. So you've almost had like an hourglass type shape, like one of those little things that you used to turn upside down to measure time. You'd have that formation and that formation. And what they're looking for is more this overall one circle. And in order to do that, what they've done is strategically paired up where they've brought it down. So they've brought this down, and they've done that by bringing the feather out and then bringing it up. So I've tried and replicate that as best I can with what we have here in Australia. So I think that was the last one of the slides. I know there was one more, but that's fine. So yes, that's a little bit of a background about me. In terms of varieties, what I'm keeping, ironically, I'm keeping most varieties now. I don't keep clear wings. I've got a couple of Texas clear bodies this year. I'm trying as best I can to help out the state. So where we can, we're reducing, the thing we talk about here is having 3 really good birds to be available for the nationals. You only get points for 2 of them. But if we want to be competitive, we feel like we've got to land 2 of those birds on the top bench. And when you only have 1 bird go to the nationals, like a dark-eyed clear, it's pretty challenging to get 2 birds on the top bench when you only have 1 go. So almost impossible. So I am keeping a lot of varieties. I'm playing a little bit with recessive pieds at the moment. I certainly love the grey wings. So I fell in love with them back when I was a young kid, and I saw the ones that Brad Wind had from Bruce Carter. So a sky blue grey wing is probably my favourite bird. But I've worked with birds and tried to find birds that are prepotent or potent for a particular feature, and then tried to incorporate that across multiple varieties at the same time. So that's sort of where I've come from with this. Hopefully that answered your question, Brett.
Thanks, Troy. What routines, products, etc. do you use, and what is it? Daily, weekly, monthly? Like some members here use Origo stem in water and things like that on different days. Do you prescribe to that?
I used to soak seed. I used to sprout it. I used to add a bunch of Rob Marshall's products to it. And I used to spend an awful lot of time. And one of the things we learn in business is work smarter, not harder. So when I went to the UK and met with Mike Ball, he was using a product there called AviSmart. And I started importing a bunch of that. And it's basically a dry soft food. So you don't have to throw it out. You can leave it in the container for 12 months. Obviously, as long as the birds haven't defecated all over it, you're fine to do it. So I thought, instead of trying to grow soak seed, where I'd had some problems in the past with soak seed going moldy and things like that, I decided that I wanted to try and work smarter. So I put AviSmart in the cage, and then every day I just suck the top off it. So every breeding cage has AviSmart. The only product that I use in the water, every 2 days during the breeding season, I use vitamin B12 from Troy, and I use it at a rate of 5 mils per litre. Now, Wally Kappa put me onto that. He said, when you have your budgies, if you want the budgies to come out of the egg screaming, looking for food, he said, put them on this stuff. And I went, okay, I'll try it. And he's like, no, do it. Now, I put them on it, and you can hear the chicks from inside the egg quite clearly. And they come out and they're a real crimson red, real different colour. and they'll come out and they're screaming, and the mother knows to feed them. So it had all of these, I won't call them intangible because they're certainly tangible, but these benefits that I probably hadn't thought of a lot. So it improves hatchability because the chick's a lot stronger. For me personally, if I go and see a naturopath or something like that, quite often they'll give you a B12 shot. They'll say you're a little bit run down. Joe Manor said at one point, I think he said you couldn't put birds on B12 for more than 7 days straight because they go a bit crazy. So between the B12 and the Avismart, the Avismart obviously has a bunch of products in it, so probiotics, vitamins, etc. If I put the birds on that, people used to send me birds that were these big duds that would sit in an aviary and do nothing. You know, they weren't really interested in getting around at all. And they turn into these absolute, I don't know the appropriate word to use for it on Zoom, but they would be extremely savage and very keen to mate. So, you know, you'd put these birds in there and they were a completely different budgie. I sent Gary a couple of photos of some of the birds and look, to be fair, and provide well-rounded feedback. Speaking with Russell Ogden, he used some of it up in Queensland, and Russ said to me he actually had a couple of hens go to chicks. You know, like they were aggressive. So you've got to know your birds well enough to know if you can use it and if it's going to be the right thing to do. But it definitely gets them up and about.
So do you put the Avismart in your breeding cages every day?
I have it. It's always available in there in like a Chinese food dish.
Yep.
So I don't put a small amount in there. I put the whole container in there, and then just suck the top off it every day. So I'll suck the top off it in the night. Now, the other thing that I do put in the cages every day, try to, is fennel, mint, and rosemary. So they're 3 herbs that we grow just outside the bedroom. Put in a couple of planter boxes for them, and they're available most of the year. So the birds like to get those little bit of greens too. So outside of that and plain seed and cuttlefish, I don't have any finger drawers in the aviaries. I don't have any, in the breeding cages. So they do get less in the breeding cages than they get in the aviaries. So in the aviaries, they have access to the herb and veg mix and the greens and grains and those kind of products. They don't have access to that in the breeding cabinet.
How do you prepare your birds for shows? Take us through, like things like, do you cut their tail feathers and pull their tail feathers? Do you clip their spots or do you pull their spots? What sort of things do you do?
So if I'm being really honest when I answer this question, showing budgies wasn't really something that enormously appealed to me for the longest time. So I am very much a novice when it comes to getting birds ready for shows. So if any of you watched the YouTube feed of the Nationals this year, you would have heard Stephen Moe saying there's another Troy Holmes bird running up and down the cage, up and down the cage. I do a very poor job of it. It is something that if I'm to be self-reflective, it's an area I can definitely improve. So to answer the question, it is something that I'm focusing on now that I'm certainly getting a little bit more interested in the exhibiting side of it. For me, what I love is breeding the birds. I love trying to pair 2 birds together and create something different. That's where my passion in it is. And just working with other people, you know, friends, and just being able to create something a little bit different. I love that side of it. But for the show side of it, I've never pulled a tail out. Jeffrey Leong has been very good to me and provided a lot of advice on that side of it. Jeffrey's a little wizard when it comes to that sort of stuff. And obviously there's guys like Alan Rowe who spent a lot of time, preparing budgies for show that know a lot of good things. So my flights are on wheels and they go through those double doors so I can wheel them outside. When I do, I spray the birds down. I normally spray them a couple of times. I did one year take the birds out and put them into holding cages. What I found was that they dropped a bunch of weight, which wasn't what I wanted. So I find for me that I handle my birds a lot. So some of my birds will sit on my hands and things like that. So they're not crazy in terms of like if you put them into a show cage and they're smashing their head around all over the cage or anything like that. I don't have that problem. But what I do have is obviously they're just not used to being in the show cage. So Alan Kent has sent me a picture of a couple little V's that he's created, wooden V's that go down the bottom. Some people will use ping pong balls, but I'm mounting this year a couple of these cages on the wall, and I'll just put some birds in there that I think could be show worthy ahead of time. One thing I do notice, and when I talk with a couple of people over in the UK, the birds when they're on the Avi Smart, they look great, and they look great most of the time. And you look at it and you go, okay, they're in this really good pristine feather condition because they're being looked after, all this kind of stuff. But I realised afterwards, Gary had trimmed the vent on this bird, and I'd had it for 2 years, and the vent was still trimmed. So they actually, because I've got them on the same feed all the time, lots of times they don't molt. So one thing is, whether this year I try and artificially put them into a molt early, which you can do by just substituting, changing their diet dramatically. So if I was to put them on plain canary or Jap millet or something like that for a week, would be a possibility. Jeffrey has told me that I should cut the tails on the birds, not to pull them out while they've got blood in them, but to cut the tails 8 weeks out from the nationals, so that I've got a good tail that's fully regrown in time. Can do it 10 weeks if I want to, but he suggested 8. And he's saying that from his club selection date. Then the other thing he does is pull out some of the spots, and he does that 4 weeks before the nationals. So I did pull out some spots this year before the nationals, and worked a little bit more through that side of it, which was a little bit different for me, but it was good. So, but in terms of the show preparation, I don't at the moment change anything in diet. I do completely acknowledge that I could do it a lot better than I'm doing. I take the birds out and I spray them a couple of times in the wire aviaries as they are. So I just remove all the food from the aviary, take the trays of critter comfort out the bottom. So it's just straight through, and just walk them out and hose them down. And when they're dry, I wheel them back in. So there's, as I said, there's a lot of tricks to the trade. One of the things that I've done is become a bird carer this year. And I did that for the specific benefit of me being able to see what some of these other seasoned guys do. And I learned a lot in the back room this year. So it was really interesting to see. And I'd encourage anyone who's thinking about it, volunteering for something. If you're thinking about doing it, just put your hand up and do it. It's the very best thing you can do. Put yourself out there, be a little bit uncomfortable and just learn it. Because the knowledge that I picked up from some of the guys, and I'm talking, we were opposite WA, from guys like Normie Wheatley, from the Victorians, from Phil Hoadley, from James Bader, those guys, just some of the stuff that they helped us with. And I'm like, wow, even just from some of our own bird carers, Doug Lang, putting the little hacksaw blade comb through the top of there, just gently pulls off any caps that are on the feathers without creating any problems. Just these little tricks of the trade that these guys use just to break open a pin feather without causing any blood. These guys have done it for a long time. So I think, if you're going to breed good birds, you probably owe it to them to present them in the best possible fashion, which obviously is something that I've been lacking because I am a little bit time poor in that regard.
So just from your point of view, Troy, what sort of traits do you think come from the cockbird or the hen mainly? Does that make sense?
Yeah, look, a lot of people talk about pairing cock to cock. And by that, you're looking at the hen's father. So, you want to look at a particular bird and go, okay, this is why I want to pair them together because I'm envisaging this particular part of it. I understand that theory. For me, I feel like there's probably a lot of us who opt for the easy way out when it comes to pairing. So you'll have a fantastic hen and you go, okay, I've got this lesser sister here who she's going to breed me and budgies. She's got the same genetics. I'm going to use her. And we probably don't try hard enough with the bigger bird. When I visited Mike Ball and saw the caliber and size of the hens that he's using, I was just astounded, and they were breeding. when I visited Jeffrey Leong and saw the size of the hens he's using. They're big. The size of the feet on the cinnamon violet hen that he sold at Hills last year. Like the thing looks like a cockatiel. Its feet are that big, its bone structure. And you look at a bird like that and you're like, okay, this is something that, I particularly want to focus on and try and get that attribute into there. But for me, the only one that I've really seen that is more determined by the male or the female is probably a little bit of flecking. When I got into budgies got back into them in 2005, one of the blokes I talked to was Bobby Smith. And Bobby is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to budgies. Like he'll drum into you. You got to get protein into them in the first 8 to 10 days. He said, your flecked cock is going to breed your flecked hens. You can live with a flecked hen, can't live with a flecked cock, all right, for your program. So, these particular things, his opinion was it was sex linked. And I've seen that kind of transmission as well. But it sounds odd, but I also believe you can see a lot of flecking when a bird is split flecked, the same way that you can see opalescence on a normal. So a bird that is flecked may be able to breed you a clear-headed hen. So there's nuances and stuff with it. It's getting to know your birds and knowing what does what. So, yes, but my opinion is definitely that, they both contribute. Like I said, a lot of people do pair cock to cock. For me, I'm trying to line breed around a feature.
Okay. What point do you decide whether a bird is a keeper or you're going to cull it?
I think that's probably a really good question. So for me, my biggest gain in Budgerigars came when I was forced to downsize. Now, you listen to guys like Gary Gazzard and people like that, they only keep these really strong budgies. And then they go, oh, this pair of birds paired up in the aviary and I've got a love pair, and they produce these outstanding budgies. And you're like, okay. Then you listen to Daniel Lutoff and you look at the birds Daniel keeps, and they're phenomenal budgies. And 2 birds paired up in the flight, and they bred these phenomenal budgies. And then you look at it and you're like, 2 birds paired up in my flight, and they bred me golden face, spangle clear wings. Like, how did this work for him and not for me? And the truth is, the most important thing you can do in budgies, what will define your success is how hard you cull. Now, here's the secret. You don't have to sell them. Okay? What you decide to use in your breeding program. So if you've got an aviary there and you go, okay, this particular bird I'm going to keep, this one I'm not. Make the decision and separate them out. When I pair my birds up, I look at it and go, okay, you got 48 cabinets. Let's make it 36. Let's make it 24. Let's make it 18. Actually, you know what? You got 6 pairs. Forget the varieties, forget all that. You got 6 pairs. Tell me who you're going to pair those 6 pairs. You're going to pick 6 pairs out of all this, every bird in your aviary. Now, if you turn around and you only bred off those 6 pairs and you just wiped everything else out, you can hold on to them. You don't have to sell them. Don't get rid of them. You need backup birds. I'm not suggesting that you need to go and sell all your budgies. But if you just focused on those birds, how good do you reckon your budgies would be? And what you find is that's where the big gain comes from. So several years ago, when I say several years ago, I used to say it was a couple of years ago. It'll be a decade ago now. In 1 year, I used 3 cockbirds. And I think I used 9 hens. And I bred 27 budgies for the year. But I kept 21 of them. There's only 6 to go. Because all I did was use really, really strong budgies. So in my mind, I'm culling and sorting out birds from the moment they feather up in the nest. I can't determine instantly, like when they're getting this feathering around here, I can't determine what their wing carriage looks like at that point. So, but I am looking and going, no, you don't have it, you're gone straight away. So that decision I'm making at 21 days old. So I don't care what they are. I don't care what they come through and look like later. I cull the birds really, really hard. And the joke is then Gary and Mark come down to help me cull them and pair them up. And said to Gary, your job's to help me reduce the numbers. Gary will go and pick another 10 and go, mate, you can't get rid of that. It's gone. And we'll pull a few back in. And ironically, like Gary pulled back in the Sky Blue that won the Nationals. He was in the cull pen. So that's why he was sold this year at the national auction, because he was in the cull pen. So when you see the two other blues that didn't go, you probably understand why. Like, he was the third best. And in my mind, his wing carriage wasn't good enough. So he was lovely and clean. He was from a good family. His half-brother finished third this year, same sire, but just not quite there. So,
Right. So, Troy, what are your thoughts on AI? Artificial insemination.
look, AI is an interesting topic. I'll start by saying that I do use AI. I don't use it for everything. I use it sparingly. And what I use it for is that I've got a particular cockbird back in about 2018, and he was a 2016 rungbird from Gary. And he had a little bit of an issue with his foot. And he's a double factor dominant pied. So 16671 is his ring number. And this particular bird, I paired him up, and he bred birds that looked just like him. And I thought, wow. So the hen had no influence on the pairing. So I paired him to a different hen, and he did exactly the same. Now, I checked back in his pedigree, and he wasn't split cinnamon. So I thought, I'm going to put this guy through a grey wing hen. Paired him up to a grey wing hen, and I bred 2 split grey wings that were outstanding. Again, nearly as good as him. And I thought, I've hit like a little pocket jackpot here. So what I'm going to do, so I took a pair of fallows and I put them down. I put a pair of grey wings down. I put a pair of Lutinos down, and I put a pair of Recessive Pieds down. Now, I didn't have all these varieties at the time. I actually went out and bought a couple of them. But I put them down, and then what I did is I AI'd in this particular cockbird. So any grey wings that were visual grey wings were obviously from the grey wing to grey wing pair that were in the nest box. But what I did is I bred visuals and splits in the same nest. So I hope that makes sense. So there was 2 dads in the same nest, always the same mum. So the only way it worked was to have 2 grey wings in there and for him not to be split grey wing, which he wasn't. So the only thing he was split for was opoine. So guess what? I bred dominant pied, split recessive pieds. Huge no-no. Right? Huge no-no. But they were outstanding. Dominant pied's really easy to see. So it's not one of those genes that's hidden like fallow or grey wing. So for me, it was just about being disciplined. So if I wanted to, I could take a Lutino cockbird and pair it over a cinnamon opaline dark green hen. You don't put cinnamon into your Lutinos. Well, you do if you only keep their hens. I'm only going to keep the visual Lutino hens. So the discipline in the pairings comes into it. So for AI, I use it to fast track my rare varieties. That's what I use it for. So I'll get a particular really good normal cock that I don't want to waste by sitting in a cage with a rare variety bird. And what I do is I make sure with that rare variety bird that the bird that I have is a super variety. So for me, when I went and found the grey wings, it was really important that I went and tapped somebody like a Marty Paoli to get a really strong, good grey wing in the wing. So I'm looking for that, and I'm looking for the full body colour. Okay, it was no point getting something that was like a light grey and half a dilute and something like that. I needed a really good. So the same went with the recessive pied. The recessive pied I went and got from Henry George, and it had the 10 to 20% wing markings on a hen, which is unusual because hens are normally a lot stronger marked in the wing on a recessive pied, but I wanted a really good variety bird and I didn't want it to be flecked. And from there, I bred it out and then, slowly started to recreate my varieties. And in that way, down the track, my really good normals were related into those same birds.
So do you actually do the AI yourself, Troy, or do you get someone in?
No, I do it myself.
Okay. So it comes in kit form.
All I do is buy those little non-hairpin coated straws,
Yep.
stick the little straw in my mouth, turn the bird upside down, squeeze it, capture it, and blow it into the hand. I don't use the big long. My vision's still good enough at the moment that I don't have to use the big magnifying glass thing and any of that contraption. I just use the little straws.
Yep. What are your thoughts on the way birds are going? Like you've obviously been to Daniel Ludhoff's, and
I
they've
haven't been to Daniel's. I've
huge-
been to Mike's.
Oh, okay. You've been to
Daniel.
Mike's,
Yep.
and they got huge heads, very English and European style birds. Do you
Yep.
think we're going that way in
Look,
Australia?
I think breeding budgies is an art, and you want to be an artist. So what you don't want to do is have this bird with terrible wings and this awful face and awful shape. It's not an attractive look. For me, I want a budgie that is a carrot shape. So I'm looking for, the lower down end to be nice and tight. I'm focusing really heavily at the moment on the wing carriage. So making sure that those wings finish perfectly at the tail. I want a budgie that can fly. So one of the things, obviously, with AI is you can perpetuate a problem. So if you've got a bird that breeds birds that have long flights, you can perpetuate that across the stud really quickly. So it's almost like being able to hedge or accelerate something. You've got to be really careful. So if that particular dominant pied, double factor dominant pied had done that, I'd be in trouble. So for me, I like it. I don't like birds that can't fly. So for me, they're not really attractive. I've got one that can't fly, and it's because I was trying to clean his ring as a youngster and unfortunately broke his leg. So, but I don't think there's anyone else in my aviary that can't fly. They're not attractive.
So do you think judges are veering towards the buff-headed birds more?
I don't know if they're going more towards a buff-feathered bird. And I don't know if we can categorically say that there are buff-feathered birds now. I think we've done enough with feather that there's, a lot of different things happening. But if you look at the guys who are leading the charge in the world, they're looking at removing what they call the trousers from the bird. So the feathers that come down the body and touch against the perch, they're looking at bringing those into what you would traditionally call your more yellow-feathered budgerigar. And then while leaving that, that large, wide, barbed, feathered head on the bird so that it does look top-heavy.
So they're going from also a keyhole to a more square sort of head setup, I've noticed.
Well, definitely more rounded.
Yeah.
All the way down to incorporate the mask. Yep.
What are your thoughts? Now, let's just go back to the national auction. I think it was lot number 21. I believe went for $17,000. What are your thoughts on auctions and the types of prices they're going for nowadays?
I think what auctions has done in the past, traditionally, when I was a kid, a beginner breeder would go and buy his birds for $50 off an intermediate breeder. And that intermediate breeder would sell 10 birds and they get $500. And they take their $500 and they go and buy a $500 bird from an open breeder. Now, those open breeders, a lot of the time, unless they had a good relationship with somebody, they were kind of on their own a lot in terms of where they could buy from. But basically, Gerald Binks's old theory was you sell 10 to buy one. So if you're a beginner, you sell 10 at this price to go and buy one. You're selling them to the pet shop and you go and buy one from an intermediate breeder. The intermediate breeder sells 10 and goes and gets his outcross from there. What auctions have done, and particularly the 32 auctions online, is they've made birds a lot more accessible to everybody. So, for me, I wasn't able to find good recessive pieds anywhere around the place. And I used to have to try and go through Warren Wilson of Brazil. You get a few of these rare auctions looking for the birds. But now the 32 auctions has opened up a platform where if somebody's selling a bird in North Queensland, I can have access to it. So I can go on. I mean, right now, this week, there's about 4 auctions running. I think there's a Smith and Fox, the BSSA, the J&M Fielding, and the Sunshine Coast. So there's 4 online auctions where, if I decided I want a good Lutino hen, I could jump online and bid for one now. Now, the disparity is that obviously the beginner didn't used to have access to that. So when I was the beginner, I wasn't necessarily allowed into this particular person's aviary. Now, everyone, if you want to go and buy a Jeffrey Leong bird, you can. If you want to go and buy a Budgerigars A bird, you can. So you can access those birds and shortcut the system. What it's done is turned supply and demand on its head. And what it's really clear is that demand for the better birds is outstripping supply. So now whether the solution to that is to open up imports again, I don't know. But you can't really change a demand and supply curve unless you flood it with good birds, which we can't do. Or you tell people not to get into the hobby, which, we're encouraging people to get in. So there's not a lot we can do about it. We're not selling them for that price. That's just the price that some people have obviously determined that they're worth to them. So
when pairing your birds, Troy, what process do you use? Members use line breeding, best to best, or pairing for particular features. What's your main way of pairing up birds?
Yeah, I do not pair up for related birds. So what I do is I pair up based on features. Now, when I say I don't pair up related birds, like nearly every bird in my aviary would go back to 16672. There's birds in there related to 80. What I'm saying is that I wouldn't go closer than cousins. So I don't intentionally pair up to go, okay, I think you can only breed as good as you had if you're line breeding. So what I'm trying to do is create something beyond that. So what I want to try and do is, go the widest headed hen to the widest headed cock I've got. So what I'm looking at is doubling up everything. Now, what I can't do is double up a fault. So if I'm doubling up a fault, I'm going to lock it in just as easy as I can lock in a really good feature. So people will tell you straight away how to not breed flecking in your birds. Like you can't pair 2 flecked birds together or you'll get flecking. People forget you can turn that analogy on its head and go, okay, well, if you don't want to breed a bird with a good head, pair a bird with a good head to a bird without a good head. Like it's the same analogy as flecking. So you want to breed flecking, which no one does, you breed 2 fleck birds together. In the same way, if you want to breed a bird with a good head, you pair 2 birds with a good head together. Like it's that simple.
Right. So what's the best advice you could give to someone starting out?
My best advice to give to somebody starting out would probably be, persistence and patience, power of will, and get around and see as many breeders as you can and get involved in what they're doing. And what I mean by that, I'd have to explain through examples. So I went to Henry George's house one day and Henry had to move an egg. And when he moved an egg, he brought it up, gave the egg a kiss and put it in the nest box. And I said, what is that, for good luck? He's like, no. Grabbed me and he's like, have a look at this. So he grabbed an egg out of a nest and I put it against my lip, and your lips are very sensitive and you can feel the temperature of it. Then he grabbed one out of a different nest and he touched it against my lip and it was heaps hotter. I thought, oh, that's really interesting. He said to me, when you're moving eggs mid-term, they'll addle if the temperature changes significantly. He goes, so you got to find a hen that has the same temperature as the egg you're moving. Like, oh, there you go. So he puts it up, checks it against his lip, and then puts it into the box most appropriate. I thought, oh, that's really smart. I go to Gary Gazzard's and Gary says, Gary does an AI, does not AI. And yet he breeds some of the most modern and powerful budgies you've seen in the country. And he gets these birds to pair up and they're fertile. And it's like, what's the secret to your success? Gary's like, I don't know. You go to Gary's and you watch what Gary does. Gary will put a pair in a cabinet on their own without a box for 2 weeks. Now, it's not a cabinet. It's a wire breeding cage. Okay. Yep. Then he takes that pair once they're bonded and he throws them into a long holding cage where there's two other pairs. And if they break the bond, they don't go in a cabinet. But if they keep the bond, they get a cabinet. So guess what? These two are loved up. They're mating. They're already all together. I throw two birds in the cabinet and the hen lays in 10 days. There's no chance they're going to be fertile. Oh, maybe, 10%. But you watch these guys and they throw birds in the cabinet and they hope for it. And you're like, those two birds don't even know each other yet. They haven't worked out how to mate with one another. There's been no courting. There's nothing. And you're expecting fertility. Gary's pair bonding his birds. He doesn't call that mating them up. He's pair bonding them. Then he tests the bond. So he puts them in a cage. They've fallen in love. He drops them in a cage with two other couples, like some sort of Love Island thing that he does. And if they're there and they're still together, then they can have a cabinet.
Because
they're mating. They're already paired.
I've noticed that in some of your videos, you've talked about the love pair.
Yep.
They obviously paired up in the aviary.
Correct. Now, again, when you get rid of so many birds, and Gary, for the longest time, didn't carry varieties in the sense of he wasn't playing with dark-eyed clears and golden faces and things like that. He's got a couple of those now because he's been helping out with the white caps. But Gary's aviary, if you can imagine, you walked in and it was just quality. So if anything paired up in the aviary, it'd breed a good bird. Yeah. Now, he's smart enough and intelligent enough that he can actually work out how to take that to the next level as well by his actual selective pairings. But he had these two birds pair up in the aviary that were outstanding. And you would absolutely let those two go together and they're mating in the aviary, put them in a cabinet, and yeah, I think he bred in excess of 30 babies from them over a couple of years.
Wow. How often? Oh, actually, we did touch base on it. Your thoughts on flecking? Should it be completely removed? Birds placed last. Several classes had fleck birds in the top three at the nationals. What is your thoughts on that?
Look, the best bird needs to win. In my mind, it's pretty hard to say that the best bird's going to be a flecked bird, but I don't think it needs to be disqualified or ran down unless it's really ticked. I think somewhere around where they've got the guidelines right now are right. I'm an aspiring judge. I'm not a judge. So I'm doing the program here. I think a lot of those cinnamon opalines that are filthy dirty, they don't belong on the show bench. If you've got a place for them in your program at home, by all means, go ahead and use them. I certainly wouldn't be going down the path of getting rid of all my flecked birds. Now, when I say that, I am getting rid of a lot of flecked birds because I made a decision a couple of years ago where I had to pair through a fault. So my flecked birds right now, I'm using into things like double factor spangles and lutinos, where there's not a great deal of concern for it, but I'm actively pairing away. Mark Fellows told me, he said, you're only 2 pairings away from ever eliminating a fault. So, and it's true. Like if you take a bird with horrible wings and you pair it to a bird with super good wings, that's from 2 birds that have super good wings, it's a chance to breed some birds that have good wings and some that don't. But then when you take that bird, no matter how strong that parent with the bad wings was, and you pair it to another bird that's got super good wings, those babies 2 generations on are going to have good wings. The same applies with flecking. If you take a flecked bird, you pair it to a super clean bird, then you take those babies and you pair them to a super clean bird, you'll breed clean birds. The problem is a lot of people are pairing them to clean birds that aren't bred from clean birds, and they're still carrying on the flecking, so they don't understand their birds well enough to know what they're doing. So I've almost got to have a stable of birds where I know this particular bird breeds line over the eye. This guy here is really good for structure, for size. So if I've got a particular bird or something's happening there and I want to go out, I need to improve spot size on these birds, it's this guy over here. If I want to do this, it's that guy over there. And that's where I'm going with them. So if I could have an aviary without flecking, I would. It's certainly a fault. But I think a mistake that people made in the UK a few decades ago now, was to get rid of all their flecked birds, and they fell a little bit behind Europe. There's certainly not a place for them on the show bench. Not arguing that. But like with any fault, you've got to work with it to try and pull all the pieces of the mosaic together. So
we've got two more questions, Troy. It's been
Yep.
an hour and 7 minutes. Are you okay to answer two
Sure.
more questions?
Yep.
Everyone else okay for two more questions? Okay. Second last question. How often, now we know that you've got quite quality birds in your aviary, how often do you outsource?
So for me, where I found my gains is that I've worked with other people. So right now, if let's say Derek Poole down there breeds some fantastic grey wings, and he says, here's a grey wing, and we're going to work together on this grey wing. I'm going to pair that grey wing to a really good grey wing of mine. I'm not going to pair it to something that's borderline or something that's cut off. Like if I've got a really good bird from him, and then we've created an in-out cross together, I'm going to send that back to his place, a particular bird off that nest, and I'm going to keep some myself. And then a year or two from now, he might get another one. And Gary and Mark and Peter Thurn have worked in really well in that way. They've created some better budgies, in my mind, from pairing the top birds from the studs together. So one of the things that was really apparent for me, when you look back in history, when the first budgies from the UK came out, we actually bred some birds. I think it was 92, 14, 985 Gary bred, which was a budgie well ahead of his time. And it was because particular partnerships in the UK, they didn't want to work together. So these guys had great budgies and these guys had great budgies, but they never actually linked them together. And if you look at the likes of Daniel Lutoff, he will go and visit people. Jeff Hall said to me that Daniel had asked him about a couple of birds coming back. I know Daniel was working with Mike, and I'm sure, Martin Halen to be working in with some people himself. These guys are sharing and working together with their nests. So for me, there's great advantage in that. I brought in a couple of birds for structure and cleanliness from Jeffrey Leong. One of the real surprises I got out of it was the number of eggs that they laid. So Jeffrey had said to me, these particular families, they breed they'll lay 8 or 9 eggs. And he wasn't wrong. Like I had these huge nests. I had to work out how to put half the babies somewhere else. So, and when you've got that problem and you're looking at these big show budgies that, people are concerned don't breed, if you pair them together right, and if you pair bond them, and you make sure your birds are cleaned out beforehand and they've done all the right things and they're on B12 and they're on a good diet, and you pair them together and the hen lays 8 eggs, I mean, you're halfway there.
So lastly, Troy, tell us how we can grow the hobby. How do we get kids back into the hobby that are sitting on their PlayStations?
It's a very good question.
Have you got any ideas? Because we've noticed that the Budgerigar South Australia Club has exploded in your numbers.
Yep. So what we're trying to do here is activate budgies. So by activate, we mean turn it on again for people to understand. One of the great realizations for me is that associated bodies, not just in budgies, in everything you do, whether it be darts, whether it be dogs, whether it be businesses, associated bodies are becoming irrelevant. So how do you turn that around to become customer-centric? How do you look at it and go, okay, what has the Budgerigar Council of Tasmania, or what has one of the clubs, do you have to offer for somebody who want to come into budgies? What can you do? You can give them rings like that. People can source their rings through there. Yep, no, I get that. But what can you actually offer them? So in order to answer that question, you have to ask yourself, what is it I like about budgies? I can tell you one of the things I love about budgies, and that is on days like today, getting to sit around and chat together, getting to be able to talk, bringing a bird along and having a chat about it. One thing, like my favourite part of the year, I'm not going to lie, is when Mark and Gary come down and we pair up the birds. Because I look at this bird and I'm like, I really like this bird, but there's something about it. I just can't put my finger on that I don't like. And Gary will go, well, it's a mask. I'm like, oh, how did I not see that? Like, it is. Sometimes you get Avery blind. So being able to have those conversations and talk through that stuff, a bit of banter at the auction, it's about social interaction. So the question is, how do you as a club offer social interactions? Because my thing has been, when I get there at a lot of clubs, I see people read out minutes of meetings and a treasurer's report. Now, I'm not going to lie, in 2005, when I went to the Northeast Club in Adelaide, I went to one meeting and I don't think I went again for 10 years because my interaction, I love talking to Gary. I love talking to Wally, sitting down and chatting with those guys over the telephone. I didn't really have a need. I ordered my rings. So the question was, how do you become relevant? How do you make things interesting? And the question you've almost got to ask yourself is the same way you ask the question, how do you put an elephant in a refrigerator? And your head immediately goes to an elephant's too big to put in a refrigerator. The answer is you open the door, you put the elephant in and you close the door. That's how you put an elephant in a refrigerator. All right? You're thinking about the size of the refrigerator and the size of the elephant. So what's the meeting that you get the most attendance to for the year? One of them will likely be your Christmas party. If you guys go to a pub, it's a Christmas party. So my question is to you, what is it about the Christmas party that people enjoy? Is it everyone getting together? Is it the fact that the wives come? One of the things that they're doing here in South Australia now, I have absolutely nothing to do with, and it goes gangbusters, is that the females in the hobby get together once a month and they go to someone's aviary and they do like a banquet lunch. They bring everything along, or they go out for Chinese, and it's all about being social. Because if you're around friends, you want to come. So the first thing you've got to do is make it appealing. Okay? So how do you challenge yourself to go, why would I come out on a cold winter's night and drive half an hour somewhere to something? And the difference is, in my mind, you've got to change the mentality from a meeting to it's an event. Every one of these things is now an event. So scrap the word meeting. Never call it a meeting again. If you want to have a committee meeting where you go through the treasurer's report and stuff, which is a separate group of people, do that and email it out to the people. There might be somebody there who's interested in reading it. I'm not. I don't care. Like what money we have in the bank. I hope we got money in the bank, but that's not why I come to. It's not why I come to hang out with you guys. Like if I come to hang out with you guys, like, how's your breeding season going? What's been going on? I'd love an aviary visit. Do you get good people, good numbers along to an aviary visit? So number one is you've got to change the mindset from meeting to event. Okay. You've got to become attractive. Okay. So then the next question is, how do I attract people? Okay. So the first thing you've got to do is get the foundations right. So the foundations are, let's make it interesting. Let's make it attractive. These are events now. They're not meetings. So what can I do that gets that? So you've made that decision. The next thing is being findable. So if you go on to Facebook and you decide you want to advertise, right now you can select a category, pets, and you can select a category, birds. Now, if I do that for South Australia, Facebook tells me that there's 197,500 people that have selected an interest in birds in South Australia. If I click on the city of Adelaide, there's 122,000 in a 50-kilometre radius. Now, I can only hazard a guess what it would be for Tasmania, but it'd be 100,000. So 100,000 people in Tasmania who are on Facebook who like birds. Now, they're not budgies. You can't pick budgies. You can pick dogs, cats, birds. You can't pick a species of bird. But what happens is you've somehow got to connect with them. So what I found really interesting, and if you guys have time, I can probably show you so that it makes sense, is there's programs out there that look on Google and try and understand, what people are looking for and the words that they're using. So if I go to, where's my Zoom? I'm going to share this real quick. Can everyone see that screen? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So what this is a program called Wincher. And what it does, it looks at words that people search in Google. So if we look at it, we launched our website in May of this year. So you can see here we've gone from nobody. So we had a website. We're averaging 16 people a month. So now we're averaging 6,000 people a month visiting our website. Now, I can put in competitors, so exactly the same words for other ones. So Bird Health is here. That's Rob Marshall's company. Budgerigars SA, which is a general one. United, BS New South Wales, and the BSSA. This gives you an idea of the other figures. So that's at 1,600. BSSA is at 587. The council is at 6,000 people visiting it per month. Now, when you go in, you look at it and you go, okay, immediately if you ask the question, you say, okay, what are people looking up when they go onto a website? Well, they're actually not looking up the word Budgerigar. Like Budgerigar is looked up about 6,600 times. Yeah, this is the volume of people that are searching it. And right now, the council in South Australia is sitting at number 44. So if you go onto Google on your phone and you have a look and you type in the word Budgerigar, you're going to have to go into page 5 to find the Budgerigar Council of South Australia listed on there. So the question is, what are people going to find? So when you go through this, what they're not finding is anything to do with exhibition budgerigars, which is really interesting. So this little thing over here, SERP, is search engines result page. So if you type budgerigars in, rather than you doing it on your phone, I can tell you straight away. And what it will come up with is Wikipedia, Bush Heritage, Spruce Pets, something else. It doesn't come up with exhibition budgies. So people don't know that this hobby exists. We assume when we do this that it does, but if you go over to your keyword research, your competitors, you've got 18,000 people typing in the word budgies and 6,600 typing in the word budgerigars. So people don't go into the internet and type in normal sky blue. They write blue budgie. So the question becomes, how do you become found? So what we've been trying to do is to make up these pages that actually attract each one of these words. So right now, if somebody types in budgies bird in Australia, we're number 7. Okay. Now, when you go across and you look at it, bird keeping Australia is outside of 100. Bird SA is at 57. United is at outside of 100. So that's 10 pages deep. Bird Health, that's Rob Marshall's page, that's 37. So that's 4 pages deep. Brazil is not on 10 pages. The Northeast isn't on 10 pages. South Queensland is not on 10 pages. BS New South Wales not on 10 pages. BCV is not on 10 pages. How do we expect to be found if we're not on those things? Like, that's my genuine question. How do you expect people to find this hobby? So as a bit of a test, we went down to Gem Birds and we stood there, just sort of hung back without being creepy. And we waited until people went up to the Club Rung Budgies area. And we said, do you know about exhibition budgies? And they're like, oh, you ever heard of the Budgerigar Council? No. Nobody had heard about it. I would hazard a guess and say there's probably more members of the Ku Klux Klan or the something else than there is of exhibition budgies. People don't know this hobby exists. And it's such a great hobby. It's so much fun. So you get to keep these birds. It's really therapeutic. You know, there's nothing more satisfying than getting to raise baby budgies and looking after them and caring for them. You know, it's a great hobby where there's great fellowship. You know, there's people from other states ringing each other all the time. It's really worldwide. But the way that the internet shaped these days, like I can guarantee you, if you guys are into budgies, that half your Facebook feed is probably littered with stuff about budgies now. Okay? Because you have an interest in it. And because you click on those things, Facebook says, this particular person likes budgies, so I'm going to give them more about budgies. Well, our problem is we're not being found. So what we're trying to do is take steps to be found. So the first thing we're doing is understanding the words and phrases that people are using. The second thing we're doing is setting up groups. So if you're in Tassie right now, set up a Tassie Budgie Breeders Colony Budgie Breeders group, okay? And set that up as a group. And then have a couple of blokes who are happy to get on the internet and tell people, some good advice about it. But at the same time, whenever you got a Budgie Council of Tasmania event on or one of the club events, share it to that page, okay? Because in my mind, the colony breeding, it's very easy to flip somebody from colony into exhibition budgie breeding. So it's a small step. If you walk outside now and walk down to the nearest petrol station and try and convince a guy behind the counter to breed exhibition budgies, he might not even like animals. But to convert somebody over from a colony breeder to somebody else who's going to do something and enjoy the hobby, it's a lot simpler. So we call those degrees of orbits. And degree of orbit of a colony breeder is really close. Somebody who has a pet budgie, they're close, but not as close. There might be, you look at it and you go, okay, where's a parrot breeder who doesn't have budgies sit? Somewhere in there too. So can I advertise to those people? How can I get my message across? So the first thing is getting media involved. You need media to get involved in a positive way. What is it about budgies? How can we talk about budgies? Let's throw a few random topics out there. Like as a companion pet right now, a budgie is a really cost-effective alternative. People love their budgies. You have a pet budgie, but having a dog or a cat, they cost a fair bit of money. A budgie is a cheap alternative. When we've had COVID, there's a lot of people who have mental health issues. Having a budgie, is a great cost-effective way of getting over that hurdle. Let's talk about it from a different sense, jokingly. Who gets a budgie in a divorce? Do they share them? You see people sharing pets these days. There's a million different things you can talk about with the media. The one you don't want to talk about is the fact that they're $17,000, because that's going to end up as puppy farms. That's going to say somebody's out there breeding birds that are going to end up an absolute fortune. That's not a good look. That's where you get labelled with puppy farm breeders and various things.
Yeah.
What's really important is that we push forward with, the mental health benefits, the therapy of budgies, being able to keep them collectively. If budgies are supporting mental health, NDIS, any of that kind of stuff, then there wouldn't be a push for smaller aviary sizes. There wouldn't be a push amongst councils to reduce things, because there's a reason for it. And people would start to become attached to it. And then once people become attached to it, it's your job to make them aware of how you are. So what we're doing is we put posters up in every pet shop that we can find in Adelaide. We've sent them out to Port Pirie and those ones. We've jumped on about 50 different Facebook pages for pet shops around the place. Now, don't expect 50 people to sign up because you put 50 posters out there. But when you start advertising to the Facebook campaign, if somebody decides to like that and you use that same campaign next time, Facebook knows there's a really cheap get. So it puts it in front of that person again. Same way your budgie feed on Facebook grows bigger and bigger and bigger. Like all I seem to see on my Facebook feed now is budgies. All right. There's plenty of other stuff going on in the world. I don't see anything about Donald Trump. For somebody who's a Trump supporter or a conspiracy theorist, they get bombarded with constant, these are conspiracy theory things, because Facebook feels that it engages them. Facebook does exactly the same thing with budgies. If that's what engages you, it's going to get there. The problem is we don't exist out there at the moment. People don't know how to find us. People don't know that the hobby exists. And as I said, it's a great hobby. It's really enjoyable. And there's lots of great benefits for it. So it's a case of getting out there, spending a little bit of money advertising. But before you do, you've got to make sure that when that one person comes in, they go, oh, what's this? Is this interesting? And comes and has a look. They're not listening to a treasurer's report, and they're not listening to this monthly meeting. They're coming to something that they say, I can't wait to come back next month. So the challenge is, how do you make it interesting? What do you do that makes it fun? Could you have a quiz night? Yep. Do you want to organise, Martin Halen to be on Zoom? That's easy to do now. Martin and those guys are really open to that. Daniel, something like that. Does that get people along? Do you want to have a budgie bazaar? I mean, we had one here just this week gone, where people bring along show cages and books and goodness knows what, and you're in, and it's like a garage sale. You're in there and you're 100 miles an hour trying to get all the best stuff quickly, but there's tender birds at the same time. We're running a Budgie Fest in October, and in that, we've organised wood-fired pizzas. We've organised a winery company to come and do wine tasting. They're doing all of these things, and Budgies is just going to happen while they're there. If I can turn people around into thinking that, wood-fired pizzas and a bit of a festival and some wine and Budgies go together, the nice sound of chirping, the this, that, and the other, we can bring a few people in, and you'd be shocked at the level of interest we've had. Do we need to throw $1,000 out there for the best pet bird in Adelaide? I don't think we have to. I thought we did, but it seems like we've got so much interest garnering in it that we don't have to. We're going to get a couple of celebrity judges that we can throw at it as well. So we're going to bring in a couple of budgie judges who tell people about what a budgie looks like. But at the same time, we're going to bring in a couple of people who don't know anything about budgies, because their opinion of a pet budgie is just as important. And guess what? While all of this is going on, there's going to be a budgie show at the same venue. So these people come along and they're like, what is that rainbow budgie? Oh my God, look at that white cap. Isn't that beautiful? Oh, I want one of them. And guess what?
Yeah.
There goes the reel, the hook. Okay. That's the way you've got to do it. You don't want to run the events independently. They've got to be able to see what it is. So you guys have got to make sure that when you do that, that it's presentable. The birds have got seed and water in the cages and they look great. You don't want to come under any criticism for anything like that. We need to make sure that we're putting something out there that's attractive. Yeah. Because your biggest challenge right now is young kids coming in have so many more people who are researching ways to try and appeal to them. They're using the same machine, the same theories as what got adults hooked on pokies, they're doing through games. So there is this glut of people coming through who don't have any interest in birds. And when they get to our age, I think if you went around the room, most of you probably bred budgies as a kid. And you either got into it or got out of it at some point, you come back to it. It's a great hobby. Watmore called it the cult of the Budgerigar. Once you're in, you're in. You come back to it a couple of times. You've got to get the kids in to begin with. So how do you make it interesting? Our strategy was, with these prices being one of the big issues, is we decided we're going to get some of the breeders here to give birds away. And we were shocked. We got birds from interstate. We had Gary Gazzard, Mark Fellows, Luke Connor, these people sending us birds to give to beginners. So what we did is we said, okay, beginners only get these birds. Don't even have to be a member. Just turn up on the night. We had one guy turn up and he brought 3 kids so he could get 4 sets of tickets. And, they got 3 lots of birds. And guess what? I was so proud of him because he won a class at the Logan Shield at the state selection show, got the best opaline off to the Nationals for South Australia this year. Beginner. From coming for the come and try nights. Now, don't you reckon he's going to be hooked? I reckon he is. And that's a massive win. And when you're talking the numbers that we have in it, you only need a few. Then you get it rolling. And guess what? Harry tells his mates, and Harry's swapping a sky blue for a Mexican pizza on a Friday night. We've got to plant seeds now for trees that we may never see the shade for if we want the hobby to survive. And I know we all do. I think the challenge is we just don't know how to do it. So we're trying to build a roadmap to make sure we can.
Fantastic. Well, anyone got any questions for Troy? No.
He spoke well.
Well, Troy, thank you very much. We really do appreciate you giving up your time on a Saturday.
Yep.
It's been very interesting. I think so anyway. And we'd love to have you back sometime, maybe if not in person.
Yeah, no, I'd love to come down there. It'd be great. So I'm definitely coming down for the Nationals next year.
Excellent. We'll see you at the Nationals then, mate.
Thank you guys for having me.
Thanks, Troy. How was that, mate? All right. How was that?
That's well.